You hold Annie's small hand in yours as you disembark off the ship. It had been a long journey, and although you had spent pretty much all of your time on board around Poe, you still couldn't decide just how to feel about him. Your intuition told you that you could trust him, and yet he was with the Resistance, the people who had almost had you killed in the first place. You had never met anyone else from the Resistance, and so you supposed all of your bias towards them was being placed on Poe's shoulders, much like you had placed your bias to the First Order on Kylo Ren. But Kylo Ren had not been totally evil, and so you supposed that Poe was probably not absolutely terrible either. He was also friendly and playful around Annie, which helped you feel at least a little better.
You're back! Finally!
You watched as Poe ran out ahead of you and was immediately embraced by two people, a dark-skinned man in a brown jacket and a girl in a white tunic with her short brown hair pulled into three little loops behind her head.
You miss me?
Poe asks, squeezing each one in turn, literally lifting them up off the ground with the force of his hugs. You turn to Ladson, seeing your own fear echoed in his eyes.
What sort of hell did he bring us to?
You whisper under your breath.
Is it too late to go home?
Ladson whispers back.
Let's steal the ship and run.
But now they've all turned to face you, and you suck in a deep breath as you approach them, letting Annie hover behind you as he walks. Their faces are all smiling and joyous and welcoming, and you would almost think this was rehearsed in some way if you hadn't just spent your entire flight with Poe. This was clearly a much different military installation than the one the First Order directed.
Hi.
You say quietly, forcing a tight smile to your own lips. Poe says your name and gestures to you dramatically, taking a steep bow at his waist.
Hi.
The boy says, stepping forward.
I'm Finn.
He pulls you back into a tight, one-armed hug, and you hug him back, clearly not expecting it.
Ray.
The girl says as she embraces you, and you let your chin rest uncomfortably on her shoulder as you hug her back.
This is Anakin, but we usually just call him Annie.
You say, dropping your head to look at him. You're expecting to have to draw him out, but Annie surprises you by stepping forward and looking up at each one of them in turn, tilting his small head to the side with curiosity.
Hey, Annie.
Ray says in a playful voice as she stoops down to his level, and you notice that Anakin is looking at her with a peculiar expression on his face. As Ladson steps forward to introduce himself, that's when you notice it too. There was something about the two of them, although you couldn't help but let your attention shift toward the girl, Ray. She was pretty, sure, with a huge smile that seemed to be oozing positivity, but you couldn't help but feel like there was something else there. Something that you were missing, although you couldn't quite pick up on what it was. It's silent for a moment, and as her eyes meet yours, it's suddenly obvious to everyone that you're staring at her. She blushes and looks down for a moment, skirting her gaze to the side before she looks back up at you, but you don't so much as flinch or look away as you try to figure out what's bothering you about her. Finally, your mind settles on what it is. You say quietly.
You're force sensitive.
She raises her eyebrows but doesn't seem at all that surprised, while Poe literally does double take.
I can feel it in you as well,
Ray says quietly, but she tilts her head to the side, as if she doesn't quite understand something.
Who trained you?
You just blink and let your gaze fall. Apparently, you had let yourself slip without even realizing it. There was no good answer but the truth.
Kylo Ren.
Poe opens his mouth and then shuts it again, as if he feels like this should have been information that he should have picked up on after spending the last few days with you. Ray and Finn share a look before they both just look down to the side, like they weren't quite sure what they should say.
Dad?
Annie asks, looking up at you. He flinches suddenly, as if he realized he wasn't supposed to say anything, and he covers his nose with the palm of his tiny hand.
Hey, little man,
Finn says, crouching down.
You want to see your new room?
Anakin bobs his little head firmly up and down.
Okay, let's go then.
Finn looks at you for approval, and you nod your head before he hoists Annie up on his shoulders, grinning as Annie emits a childish squeal of delight.
It's all right,
Ray says quietly with a reassuring smile, and she takes your upper arm in both hands as she starts to lead you after Finn and Annie.
You're not coming?
You ask, turning back to face Poe. He looks genuinely surprised, but quickly recovers himself.
Got some things to tend to.
he says, jerking his head back toward the ship.
But you'll see me around.
With a final wink, he heads off, and you let Ray lead you down the corridor, a little bit behind Finn. Ray looks at you sheepishly before she looks away again, and you're at least glad that you're not the only one that feels awkward about this whole situation.
I don't even know what I'm doing here.
You confess, more to yourself than to her.
Don't worry,
She says in that same reassuring tone.
you're safe here. Leia's going to explain everything soon. Leia?
You ask, raising an eyebrow.
Is that the name of his mother?
She seems confused, and her expression seems to say, "Whose mother?" before her head bobs up and down in understanding. She's wearing that same sad expression on her face that you had seen Poe wear back on the Falcon, and for a moment you think you can hear her words before she says them.
I'm sorry
She says quietly.
for everything that he's done to you. We heard about what happened, and I can't imagine. It's fine.
You say quickly. If everyone was going to start apologizing to you every time they saw you, you weren't going to last long here. There was only so much sympathy you could take, especially when you knew that there would be nothing for them to feel sympathetic about if they knew the truth. But that was exactly why you couldn't think about this around Rey. She had to have been pretty strong in the Force for you to be able to sense her as well as you did, which meant that she could probably get into your mind as easily as Kylo had. You could only hope that you would at least be strong enough to shield your mind and block her intrusions, should that become necessary. You follow them wordlessly through the base, with Ladson bringing up the rear. You pass a lot of humans and aliens as you walk, and pretty much all of them greet Rey and Finn, some of them by name, and you're beginning to suspect that maybe Poe wasn't bluffing when he said that everyone was friends on base. It was certainly a different atmosphere than the First Order, at any rate. While the Starkiller base had seemed downright clinical, this place seemed a lot less formal, a lot more casual, as if it was just a bunch of people who had banded together for a common purpose instead of a structured regime. Finally, Finn stops in the middle of a corridor and opens a door on his left with the key card he pulled out of his jacket, handing it to you after he swipes it over a small pad next to the door.
Thanks.
You say, taking it quickly. You put it away, but don't ask the first question on your mind. Who else has a key to this room? Ladson should get one, obviously, but who else had access to your quarters while you were sleeping? You follow Finn, Annie, and Rey into a decent-sized living room with a few couches and chairs and a table set up. Annie runs to each article of furniture in turn, touching everything, as if making sure that it's all real. Finn and Rey both gaze at you expectantly, anxiously, as if to make sure that you like it, and you force a smile to your lips.
It's nice.
You say at length. It wasn't as nice as Kylo Ren's quarters had been, but it was considerably nicer than the place you had called home for the last few years. It was the nicest place Annie had ever been, anyway.
There's 2 bedrooms.
Rey says, pointing to each door in turn at either end of the apartment.
There's a queen-size bed in there and 2 twin-size beds in there. Come on!
Annie grabs Ladson's hand, and he pulls him toward one of the doors.
Let's pick out our beds.
Ladson allows himself to be led into the other room while you turn back to Rey and Finn.
They slept in the same room back at home.
You offer as a means of explanation.
I take it you already know who Annie's real father is. The name does sort of give it away.
Finn jokes. You shrug your shoulders uncomfortably as you look away, but Rey puts a hand comfortingly on your arm.
You're safe here now. Thanks.
You say, forcing a tight smile to your lips. She was more powerful than you. You could sense it, but you didn't know if she was more or less powerful than Kylo. He had probably gotten more powerful than the last time you had saw him too, but you had no real way of knowing.
Look, I know you guys probably know everything about Kylo Ren, but I don't, and neither does Annie, so we're not going to say anything.
Rey says quickly, shaking her head.
Not our place.
Finn adds, and there's a note of sincerity in his voice that you appreciate.
Thanks.
You say quickly.
So, how did you 2 join up with the Resistance?
Rey looks at Finn and laughs as she throws back her head, her eyes crinkling at the corners.
It's quite a story.
She tells you, clutching Finn's arm.
Long story short, I'm an ex-stormtrooper who picked up Ray on Jakku. Oh, you picked me up?
Ray interrupts teasingly.
If I remember correctly, I was the one trying to evade the First Order.
He explains as he grins at her.
I crashed there with Poe, and we were trying to find BB-8.
He stops talking as he sees the look on your face.
What? Something I said? Ex-stormtrooper?
You ask, and you can hear Ladson come into the room from behind you.
Are you talking about me?
Ladson asks, and you can tell by the edge in his tone that he's not happy about you outing him.
Actually, him.
You say, drawing out your words slowly as you point towards Finn. Finn looks between you two before he makes the connection.
We knew you guys were captives up there.
He turns hesitantly to Ladson.
But they really started to train you as stormtrooper?
Ladson bows his head in a curt nod.
Man,
He shakes his head as if he doesn't quite know what to say. You shuffle awkwardly from foot to foot, and you can literally hear Ladson swallow the lump in his throat beside you.
If you want, we have some guys.
Finn gestures vaguely in the direction of the door.
I'll introduce you to them sometime. It might help. Thanks.
Ladson says quickly, and they leave it at that. You had no idea what Ladson had been through, but if there was some sort of ex-stormtrooper support group on board, Ladson could probably benefit from it. He never talked to you about it, knowing you could never understand what he had been through, and in a way he was right. At least this way he could meet people who had been through a similar experience.
And Ren started to train you in the Force?
Ray asks, turning to you.
Do you know what he wanted to use you for? I don't know. I'm not very strong. I probably can't do much. Just basic things. Can I?
She asks. She steps forward and offers both hands out in front of her, palms up, fingers spread. You put your palms up against each of her hands and interlace your fingers together. She closes her eyes and you do the same, immediately feeling an electric current spread between you. You had felt a similar current run between you and Kylo, but this was different. His had been charged with passion and a lingering undercurrent of enticing desire, but hers felt more along the lines of hugging Sadie. You felt a sort of warmth, like feeling the sunshine on your face after a long rainstorm. The connection between you was shy, not quite anxious, but full of an open vulnerability.
I want to be your friend.
You think you can hear her words in your head, and you open your eyes to make sure. Her head is bowed in concentration, eyes still shut, but her face is relaxed, and it's immediately clear to you that she hadn't been speaking. You had heard her voice in your head, after all. You were sure of it. As if sensing that you had severed the connection, Ray opens up her eyes a moment later and smiles at you with a tight-lipped, knowing smile. You nod at her and release your hands while Ladson and Finn look silently on.
I think you're stronger than you realize,
Ray says at length, but you don't know if she really means it, or if she's just trying to be nice. If anything, you don't think she tried to probe your thoughts. None of the familiar sensations were there, so that was a good thing. You had a feeling that she was going to find out sooner or later what had really transpired on the Starkiller base. That they were all going to find out sooner or later. But you couldn't tell if that was because of the Force or because of a nagging sense of anxiousness. There's a knock on the door, and Poe sticks his head in a moment later.
Am I interrupting something? Not a thing.
Ray replies immediately, and you just nod your head quickly in confirmation. The Force had been something of an unspoken thing aboard the First Order base, but you were quickly getting a sense that was a much more open topic to be discussed here. Even still, you didn't want to be too open about it, not when you didn't know who knew what about you. It would just be sagacious to keep all your cards close to your chest right now, until you had figured out who you could trust.
The General's ready to see you now, if you're up for it.
Poe says, looking at you.
Already?
You ask, tilting your head to one side. You figured they are going to keep you here for days, weeks even, dangling bits of information in front of you like a carrot on a string.
If this isn't a good time...
Poe starts, but you just shake your head quickly.
Ladson, stay with Annie.
You ask, turning to him. He bows his head in a brief nod as you turn to Ray and Finn.
And, thank you. You'll see us again soon.
Finn tells you, and Ray nods in agreement. You nod your head slowly and slip your pack off your back and hand it to Ladson, but make sure to keep your keycard and staff with you. There was no way you were going anywhere on this base without your staff. You can see Poe eyeing it warily before you step out to the corridor with them.
I'm guessing you have that with you at all times?
Poe asks, walking just a step in front of you in the narrow corridor.
Always. Never know when it might come in handy. To be fair, you had no reason to trust me.
Poe continues.
But can I at least ask that you not attempt to use that on the General? She's not going to be very... Wow.
You say with a laugh as you shake your head.
Way to make me sound like some kind of first-order savage. I don't just go around attacking people for no reason. I'm just saying,
He says, holding up his hands defensively.
She wants to see you alone. I just want to make sure no one gets hurt. No one's going to get hurt.
You say quickly. Poe seems to hesitate for a moment before he grabs your arm and pulls you into a nearby alcove so you weren't blocking the hallway.
I need to warn you,
He says softly.
You're going to hear stuff that you're not going to like.
You look once to the right, then to the left. Shouldn't that have been obvious?
And you're sure you can handle this?
He asks, studying you closely, as if waiting for your reaction.
The guy tortured me, right?
You ask.
Almost killed me? I'm pretty sure I can take learning about whatever else he's done.
Poe nods his head.
Fair enough.
You follow him through the corridors, almost annoyed by how everyone seems to acknowledge him and greet him by name. Did everybody really know everybody else here, or was it just because he was a commander? No, they had to be this way around Finn and Ray, too. Everyone here seemed too joyful and welcoming to be really fighting a war. Honestly, you couldn't imagine any of them going out and actually attacking someone, much less killing them. And yet, apparently this was a war that they were not only fighting, but winning? It didn't make any sense to you. Poe stops in front of a large set of double doors.
This leads to the command center.
He informs you.
She's in there, but I'll be right outside. I'm not going to do anything.
You say, a bit offended that he still didn't seem to trust you. Not that you'd really given him a reason to anyway.
If you need someone for moral support.
He finishes, and you at least have the decency to flush in embarrassment.
Okay then.
You tell him.
But I'm not going to need moral support. I have me, and that's enough.
He offers you a sad smile, and you realize how pitiful that must have sounded to him. But it was true enough. All those days you had spent locked alone in Kylo's room had given you a sense of self that no one else could take away from you. You knew who you were. You knew what you could and could not handle, and you were not going to let anything stop you from getting the answers you sought about the past of Kylo Ren.
Here we go.
You mutter to yourself. You take a deep breath in, let it out, and walk into the command center.